and then at 28 I was diagnosed with cancer. So doctors found a 11.5 centimetre tumour wedged between my spine, kidney and bowel, which was inoperable because of where it was. We went down the chemotherapy route, and kind of cutting a long story short, within kind of 3 months I'd gone from 14 stone to 6 and had less than 5% chance of survival. I had to relearn how to walk and completely rehabilitate myself really. So I picked a road bike up and I rode 5 miles around the local reservoir, and then I rode 10 miles around the local reservoir, and slowly but surely that mileage started to go up a bit. Then I did John O'Groats to Land's End as a warm-up for going across America. So yeah, I spent my birthday in his coffee shop at the time, and then 6 days later I was hit by a truck just outside New Orleans. 70 miles an hour from behind. It put me 120 feet down the road. It broke 3 of my ribs. It smashed up all my elbow, and it took all the skin off my legs. But we fast forward a little bit, and in June this year we broke the 7-day world record. I use we quite a lot because I wouldn't have been able to do it without the support and the people that I've got around me. All I was doing was riding the bike. Everybody else has been there to help me and push me along on my way. In some respects, and as awful as it sounds, and I try and choose the context that I put it in very carefully, cancer was quite possibly one of the best things that had ever happened to me. And that was purely for the fact of the lessons that it taught me and everything that's come after it.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to Listen Up with me, Ollie Baisley, and that was the voice of James Golding, who is the 7-day world endurance and distance world record holder. He is a cancer survivor, and he's a terrific human being. And I had the pleasure of knowing him and did interview him for 25 minutes a couple of weeks back. So James is an absolutely remarkable person. I met him whilst working a cycling event called Revolve 24. James was part of the media team with me, and it was an absolute pleasure to work with him. Initially we recorded this interview, Adam and I, for the Cycling Ramble, but because it kind of just kept on going naturally, James is incredibly eloquent with his speech. We thought that it'd be a good thing to put on Listen Up because it's kind of in a longer form, and he goes into kind of different topics in terms of how he fundraised and a lot about the recovery from cancer as well. So I hope you enjoy it. It's a fascinating interview. We touched on his story initially and just trying to fill people in about where he came from and why he got into such hardcore endurance cycling. He had an 11.5 centimetre tumour, like he said in that introduction there. He was nootropic at one point, which meant that he was almost allergic to air, and so he couldn't go outside because of the low red blood count and stuff like that. He lost ability to walk, and then he eventually, less than a year after recovering from cancer or being given the all clear, he raced across America and has since raised £3 million for charity, set a 7-day world record, and he's just really, really incredible. And his story was, I think, the most motivational story I've ever heard in my life. You often hear these stories on YouTube and other things like that, but actually being the person that James was speaking to and actually seeing him face to face and hearing it in the flesh really affected me, and I was so kind of blown away and impressed, and I wanted to share it with everybody because I think it's something that a lot of people could take something from. Like I said, we spoke about his story, what future goals he has, how he raised money, and the public speaking which he's got into at the moment. I think you're going to hear an awful lot from James in the future. I think he has a big public speaking career ahead of him, doing the likes of TED Talks or stuff like that. I think it's something which suits him very well, and you can tell from the interview that he's incredibly eloquent and really good at chaining together his ideas and making it an entertaining listen. So without further ado, before we get into the interview, please do check us out on social media. We're at Listen Upcast across all platforms, on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, and you can find out what we've been working on currently. These interviews are normally recorded slightly away in advance, so also do kind of give us your feedback. Let us know what you think about the podcast, what you enjoy about it, what you don't like about it. And as always, if you're listening on iTunes, please leave a review because it helps us on that platform. And finally, do share it with your friends. I think this is a story that everybody could benefit from hearing, and hopefully after you listen to it, you'll agree. So without further ado, let's hear from James Golding.
I'm just cleaning my glasses in anticipation.
So I'm here with James Golding at the Revolve 24 event, and the sun's actually come out. It's not too bad this morning. How are you feeling?
Yeah, I'm good. It was very fresh earlier. It was fresh last night as well. But no, I'm good. Quite excited for today, really.
So me and Alan were going to initially start to kind of ask you about go through how you got into cycling, where it all started for you. You've achieved several records and raised an awful lot of money for charity. So could you tell the audience a bit about why you got into cycling and where it all started? I believe it was after kind of a medical, you had cancer and that's how you got into cycling.
Yeah, I was always kind of into bikes as a kid, but road bikes weren't cool when I was younger. So I never went near a road bike. But then I kind of got rid of all my bikes around sort of the age of sort of 17, 18, and then got what was known as a proper job at the time. And then at 28, I was diagnosed with cancer. So doctors found a 11.5 centimetre tumour wedged between my spine, kidney and bowel, which was inoperable because of where it was. We went down a chemotherapy route, and kind of cutting a long story short, within kind of 3 months I'd gone from 14 stone to 6 and had less than 5% chance of survival. After an emergency operation and being kept in an induced coma, I had to relearn how to walk and completely rehabilitate myself really. After several other operations to kind of put a few other things right due to the cancer, I decided that I wanted to do something to give back to the people that had been there to support me and help me through everything, which at the time was Macmillan. So I kind of looked at different challenges, and there was part of me that wanted to sort of go back in time really. It perhaps sounds a little bit silly, but I wanted to be young again. I've got this kind of re-chance at life and realised actually the best time of my life was when I was younger and was riding a bike and was pretty carefree, and all of a sudden the things that you're surrounded by and the stuff that you have in your life all of a sudden doesn't seem as important as it did, because really it's not, it's stuff that can be replaced rather than actually having the memories and the good times, which was for me when I was kind of riding a bike and being a bit carefree. So I looked at different cycling challenges. I looked at the Midwest of America, which was a 6-day event. I looked at riding in the Rocky Mountains. I looked at John O'Groats to Land's End. But for me, 6.5 stone, being unable to lift your own head off the pillow was hard work. Riding a bike for 6 days wasn't. So I came up with this idea of riding across America. It was going to be riding from Los Angeles to Miami, 3,450, 60 miles, something like that, was the original plan. Finishing a year to the day of what was regarded as being the all clear, which was following an operation of my surgeon telling me that the tumour was getting smaller and all the surgery I had was going well. So it was going to be the idea of that really. But I picked a road bike up and I rode 5 miles around the local reservoir, and then I rode 10 miles around the local reservoir, and slowly but surely that mileage started to go up a bit. I set my sights on 1 or 2 different events, kind of a 40-mile sportif, and then the Caledonia Tap was one of them, and then the Dragon Ride, and then I did John O'Groats to Land's End as a warm-up for going across America. But this is we're kind of condensing this into a very short period of discussion, but this is over the course of sort of 8-9 months of just slow. I mean, I wasn't working at the time because I wasn't well enough to go back to work. I was still signed off, and really I shouldn't have been riding a bike, but it was something that enabled my recovery and gave me a sense of freedom that I couldn't get, because I couldn't walk long distances, but I could ride a bit further than I could walk, and it gave me the chance to kind of just get that bit stronger and rest, and get a bit stronger and rest. And so I headed out to America in the June of 2010. and it was going to be my 30th birthday on the 4th of July. So I'd always wanted to be in America on the 4th of July, because obviously it's Independence Day for those guys over there, and my birthday, and it just seemed like a kind of a special moment to be there, really. I started riding from LA, celebrated my birthday in Austin, Texas. Okay. At the time, there was this guy that got a few yellow jerseys, which was, I wanted to go to his coffee shop and stuff like that. He's not got those jerseys anymore.
He still has them, I think. He's just in his basement. They're just not really recognised anymore. That's Lance Armstrong we're talking about.
It was Lance Armstrong, yeah. Hell should not cast his name, but you got to give the guy credit for achieving the success over cancer in the way that he did, but it was everything else that came after that I think was a bit of a problem. So I spent my birthday in his coffee shop at the time, and then 6 days later I was hit by a truck just outside New Orleans. 70 miles an hour from behind. It put me 120 feet down the road. It broke 3 of my ribs, it smashed up all my elbow, and it took all the skin off my legs. 3 days in hospital, to the airport in Miami, where I then flew home and found out I'd got MRSA in my elbow, and so there was a bit more treatment.
For those who don't know, can you explain what MRSA is?
It's basically a deadly infection. So you normally, if you catch it early enough, you can go through a course of pretty heavy antibiotics and you'll kind of be okay. But it's a hospital bug, really. We had a few problems with it in the UK a couple of years ago, but it's a hospital bug that does the rounds every now and again, and I'd got it in my elbow, so I needed a course of heavy antibiotics after that, or several courses of heavy antibiotics. But 6 months later I went back to America. I cycled from LA to Miami. In my head, even if I went back to New Orleans and started from where the accident had happened, I still wouldn't have ridden across America. I would have ridden from LA to New Orleans and then New Orleans to Miami. So I went back out to LA and rode from LA to Miami in 24 days, doing 147 miles a day, 3,473 miles, and raised over £100,000 for Macmillan. I found out at the time of riding across America, which strangely, at the time I was sat with the guy who was first on the scene of the accident when I got a phone call from my now wife Louise to tell me that she was pregnant. I was told there was more chance of the moon hitting Earth than me ever being able to have children. So we'd got the little guy on the way. Unfortunately, a bit later on that year, I was diagnosed with cancer for a second time. But you just keep going. You've not really got any. I'm a bit of a believer that once you let things get inside your head, that's when they start to win. So I was determined that I wasn't going to let this thing get inside my head. It wasn't going to be as bad as it was first time round, in my view. They'd got the tumour when it was the size of a ping pong ball as opposed to the size of a grapefruit. It wasn't going to cause as many complications. Although we couldn't find a surgeon to actually do the operation because none of them wanted to go near it because of where it was located. So from sort of beginning of June, it took until sort of mid-September to find a surgeon or to get an appointment booked in for that operation. So I still rode the London to Paris. I still did the Great Swim Series. I did the Alpine Challenge with Hot Chili. So it was kind of 3 days racing over in the Alps. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, flew home on the Sunday, had the tumour removed on the Monday. Freddie was born 2 weeks after that, and then 2 weeks after that I went in for chemo, and then 4 weeks after that I started a course of 3 months of radiotherapy. But we fast forward a little bit, and in June this year we broke the 7-day world record. I use we quite a lot because I wouldn't have been able to do it without the support and the people that I've got around me. All I was doing was riding the bike. Everybody else has been there to help me and push me along on my way. So we rode 1,766 miles in 7 days, equivalent of 252, which is a new Guinness World Record. So quite chuffed with that. And since 2010, we've raised over 3 million for UK cancer charities.
It's a pretty remarkable story. I think I've never had anything quite like it, to be honest. It's very impressive. I know did a marathon this year, and it kind of something happened which kickstarted me into getting into sport and stuff like that. And I'm doing an Ironman next summer. Were you ever that motivated and that driven beforehand, or do you reckon that kind of the severity of the cancer made you think that you just got to do it all, and kind of the stakes that hold?
I think I've always had that drive and that ambition, that will to succeed inside of me, but I've never had something that's brought it out of me. Whereas I think the cancer kind of made me realise that one thing that I found. So when I went in to hospital, I was living in a flat that I owned in a place called Braunston, and I'd got another house which was rented out as bedsits. And when I went into hospital, my mum was looking after the bedsits, and she decided that she wasn't able to look after those whilst I was ill and, be there for me at the same time. So a load of my friends moved all of my stuff out of my flat and back into my house. They moved the tenants out of the house, moved all of my stuff from the flat back into the house, and then rented the house out. Now, when I came out of hospital, after a period of time of starting to feel a bit better, I started going through all of these boxes. This will make sense. I started going through all of my boxes and unpacking everything that had been moved for me whilst I was in hospital. And all of a sudden, I'm starting to pull out expensive suits, expensive clothes, expensive watches, expensive pens, all the stuff that I'd bought when I was a land agent and earning good money. But what was interesting about it was the fact that I forgot whilst I was in hospital that I owned any of it. I didn't think about any of it. None of it even entered my mind of where it was or why I hadn't got it with me. So all of a sudden I realised actually that this stuff wasn't important, and that my whole kind of my goals and ambitions had been completely wrong. About what car you own. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'd love an RS4. I really would. But I've got a transport van and I can go anywhere I want in it. I can put all my bikes in it. I can put my little boy in it. I can put the wife in it. Not literally put them in it, but we can get kind of everything in there. And all of a sudden you kind of get this refocus. You realise that being here and at Brands Hatch today for 24 hours, thankfully I'm not racing now, but seeing all the people that are here and the reasons that they're here, and the whole route that I was on a couple of weeks ago, all the people that I've met and that I know from that, and and all the people that I know from Hot Chili, and in some respects, and as awful as it sounds, and I try and choose the context that I put it in very carefully, cancer was quite possibly one of the best things that had ever happened to me. And that was purely for the fact of the lessons that it taught me and everything that's come after it. If I hadn't had cancer, I wouldn't be stood here talking to you boys. If I wouldn't be doing stuff with Rebecca Charlton, I wouldn't have been sponsored by Adidas, I wouldn't be sponsored by Trek, I wouldn't have worked with Addy Eyewear, I wouldn't work with Callas, I wouldn't have met Louise, I wouldn't have met my little boy's godfather who's here today. So the way that the most horrible, disastrous thing in my life, which ever since it happened, I've fought every day to try and raise money and to try and beat it, actually changed my life massively, which has turned out to be for the better. I've got nowhere near as much money as what I used to earn, but I've got so much more value in my life.
And I think ultimately there's something I learned over kind of the years of university and stuff like that ultimately what's more matters is like how you feel when you go to bed and stuff like that. Like, have you had a good day and stuff like that? And it's much more important than other things like that. How did you raise all that money? What did you use? Did you use social media, GoFundMe, stuff like that? Those sort of kind of websites?
It was more kind of social media and interaction with big corporates. So there was very little, kind of GoFundMe and those kind of things. They weren't around. They were, but they weren't as prominent in the marketplace as such as they are now. We see things like that a lot more. So a lot of it was match funding. A lot of it was working with corporates to in some cases get their staff raising money on behalf of what I was doing. But it was also going and developing relationships of where I would work with a corporate partner, and in turn they would match fund anything that I personally raised. So it's just been a kind of, there was never a kind of a right, I'm going to raise $1 million. It was always kind of like, I'm going to raise some money on this event, and now I'm going to raise some money on this, and all of a sudden you then kind of tighten it up and you're saying, well, there's over 3 million quid here, and you don't really know how you did it, because it wasn't, it's not been a conscious effort to try and raise. Obviously I've wanted to raise money and I've wanted to raise awareness, and I want to do what I can to try and fight and help people that have cancer and make sure they get the treatment that they need, but hopefully one day be in a situation of where everybody can survive cancer. I think the terminology of beating cancer is slightly difficult, but certainly making sure that the medication, the care, the support, and that we're pushing forward in that is really important. But yeah, I don't. It was through donations, it was through different events, it was through match funding, and it was just through pushing those boundaries of having partners on board that would allow us to sell product, and then they would match fund whatever we sold those products for. So it's an accumulation of a lot of people's hard work. For me to sit here and say I've raised 3 million, I'd be lying.
Yeah. I should have asked this at the start, but how are you doing health-wise now? Are you kind of got all the clear and nothing's wrong at the moment?
No, I'm cracking. Yeah, I'm yeah. Okay. You know, I'm fine. A few aches and pains, but that's the life of riding a bike, isn't it? You know.
Yeah, absolutely. So, on the 7-day challenge where you broke the world record, why was that one of your goals, and why was that kind of one of the next big challenges after doing the race across America? Why did you set your sights on that one?
I didn't do the race across America, I did the ride across America. So I rode from LA to Miami, but the race across America is very much on the radar. So one of my beliefs is that actually we're capable of achieving anything that we want to. So I go into schools all around the country, and hopefully over the course of the next 12 months I'll go into 50 schools across the country. And part of that is belief to achieve that actually we are capable of achieving anything that we want to. What we have to do is break down our goals to a realistic level, in terms of where do we want to go to, so what are our goals, but also where are we now. And that is probably the most honest point, is where are we now, and then looking at a logical path of how we get to where we want to get to. Again, another point of being honest. Okay, are we realistically going to be able to achieve that within the next month, week, day? You know, I'm going to go out for a 100-mile ride. Okay, when was the last time you rode 100 miles? I never have. Okay, what's the highest miles you've ever ridden? 50. So is a 100-mile ride really logical? You know, it's breaking those goals down to be realistic about where you are, and then taking steps towards that. And the 7-day world record was, in many ways, a step towards the race across America. It was to find out where we're at now over a 7-day period, to find out we didn't achieve what we wanted to off the 7-day world record, but we broke the record. So we achieved what we wanted to, but we didn't achieve what we would have liked. We were talking about this last night. Yeah. You know, there's a difference between what you would like and what you need to do, and we did what we needed to do, and we got the record. And I still hasn't really sunk in now, and part of that is because I believe that anybody could do it if they wanted to with the right steps. So breaking down those goals, making achievable levels that you can go to, and being realistic about where your end goal is going to be. And at the moment, my end goal is race across America in 2019. So 2017 was the 7-day world record. 2018 has got some challenges booked in for it, which I can't tell you about. And then we'll look for 2019 being the race across America, and we'll be looking at a kind of a top 3 place there if I can.
I can emphasise a bit with the kind of thinking that something's not possible. When I did my marathon, I'd never run over 10k, and 26 miles seemed just absolutely absurd. But once you got into it and you built it up steadily, you could do it. And similarly, hopefully with the Ironman, I can manage that as well. How did you get into motivational speaking? I believe it's what kind of you do with the kind of kids, and I imagine that's pretty rewarding, going into schools and hopefully trying to change some mindsets and not maybe hopefully inspire, but also kind of just change their perspective on, like you said, what's possible.
It's just something. It's kind of something that I got asked to do some for Macmillan originally, and I just kind of enjoyed doing it. In terms of it being rewarding, it kind of is, but you don't hear about it. You know, if you inspire 10 kids, there's probably one that's going to tell you that you've inspired them. Actually, they do a lot more over social media than they do to your face. But I enjoy doing it, and it's really, speaking about it's really helped me kind of deal with everything that happened, which I didn't do originally. I didn't deal with it very well. I just kind of buried my head and did what most blokes do and ran away from it, which involved riding my bike. And I don't mind admitting that, and in some respects I probably still do run a little bit by riding my bike. But now I'm able to turn it around and hopefully benefit other people and show people what we're capable of achieving. Inspiring kids is something that I really enjoy doing. And that again just came from being invited into a school, to then being invited into another school, to then kind of going, okay, I want to go and do the race across America, but I don't want somebody to just give me everything that I need and go and ride across America, because otherwise I'm kind of almost being paid to ride a bike. And that's not really what it's about. I mean, that would be lovely. It'd be lovely if somebody paid me to ride a bike. I mean, that would be great. But the truth of it is that that's not really very engaging with the people that we want to engage with, because there's no realism about it. You can't say, oh, you can achieve anything you want, go and do the race across America, look at me, I'm paid to do it. So I wanted to try and give something back at the same time as being able to achieve these goals, and being able to go and talk to kids and then get them to follow the journey to actually practice what you preach. That's the whole package really, is kind of saying to them, look, you can achieve these things, and look, this is where I want to get to, and if you follow me on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter or whatever, you can actually see this happening, and hopefully in a couple of years' time we'll find out the impact that it's actually had.
Do you maybe see that as a potential career as well? I know that some people do go into kind of that sort of speaking kind of full time, and just from speaking to you today, I think you'd be great at it. Is that something maybe you're looking at doing, like after you, because I'm not sure what your plans are, but you can always keep riding until you're 50, but maybe was that maybe kind of a long-term goal?
Definitely, yeah, definitely. The motivational speaking is something I really enjoy doing, and it's something that I want to carry on doing. Even bike life is bike life. You know, a bike is for life. Whether it's the bike is for life, or oh look, that new one over there is for life. Until the next new one comes along. But certainly there's some plans after Race Across America. I spotted the Trans-Serbian Extreme a couple of weeks ago, which is about 9,000 kilometres in 24 days, and that looks pretty interesting. Most people would say crazy, brutal, stupid, but I'm like, I kind of like the look at it. So there's a few of the plans and stuff that I want to do, but the motivational speaking is always something that I want to carry on around it. And I'm doing some stuff with some corporates at the moment, and so I want to do the schools, because I want to give back to that 14 to 18 year olds is kind of the target within schools that I want to go and talk to, but I want to do the corporate stuff at the same time.
I think like you has tested, when I did the marathon, now like anything less than 10k doesn't actually really make me think. And I think is that the case for you, that you want to keep on pushing yourself further, because once you've kind of done something, it seems like maybe not slightly less of a challenge, but like you want to try and go further and further and further. Is that maybe something with trying to do the Race Across America and then the 9,000 mile race as well?
Kind of. It is kind of. I'm not searching for that next. I'm not searching for the same high. That's not the point of it, really. The point is that if you've done 110 miles, you can do 120 miles.
Yeah. If
you've done 120, you can do 130. If you haven't done it for a long time, then it might take you slightly longer. But the fact of it is, and one analogy that I use within the speaking stuff is that at one point in life you weren't able to walk, you weren't able to do anything. Anything that you do now, you weren't able to do. You dragged yourself across the carpet, you found a bit of furniture, you pulled yourself up and you fell over. You dragged yourself across again, you pulled yourself up, you fell over. Eventually you did that, and then you walked for one step, and then you walked for two steps, and then you fell over. And then you did 3 steps and fell over. Now you just walk naturally every day of the week. You get up and go for a walk in the middle of the night without even thinking about it. As humans developed, they became better and stronger at what they did, and I just think that we're all capable of it. And I'm just trying to kind of practice what I preach, but also trying to look for these experiences that I can show to my little boy and show him that he's capable of achieving anything that he wants to, and that actually the sky is the limit. It really is. People say humans will never fly. Well, there's a guy just invented an Iron Man suit, and he was on a TED talk a few weeks ago, and he can now fly. So it's just pushing those boundaries a little bit further, because that's what we've always done, and I think that's what we should always do.
If you haven't done a TED talk yet, I think you'll definitely be doing one at some point. And I believe you're a father of 2 now as well?
I'm a father of 2, but I'll actually be a father of 3 in January. Okay, so there's one on the way.
They've got an awful lot to be proud of. Thank you very much for the interview. And just kind of talking about the Revolve race today, what's it like doing a 24-hour race? You were kind of explaining to us last night that you can have neck issues, which maybe is not the first thing you think about, but what's the most challenging part, and what's the thing that people don't think about when they consider like a 24-hour race?
I think the worst thing, not wanting to kind of backtrack on what you were saying, but the worst thing that people think about is the 24 hours. They think, oh, it's 24 hours of racing. It's not. It's 24 lots of an hour, or it's 48 lots of half an hour, or whichever way you decide to break that down. 24-hour racing is something that's relatively new to me in terms of I've never done a 24-hour race, but I've done longer stuff. 24 hours for me is kind of it's an interesting concept that I wanted to get into, and I wanted to do Revolve this year, but then I kind of pulled my knee on the Holt route, and then Hugh, who's one of the organisers or the owner of the 24 Revolve, said, do you want to help us with the media? And I kind of went, yay, I don't have to do it. But I will be back to do it. So there's lots of stuff you need to think about when you're doing it. Are you doing it as a solo? Are you doing it as multiple riders? If you are doing it as a solo, you need some people there to help you. You need to think about your food. You need to think about your position on the bike. You need to think about your changes of clothing. You need to think about your nutrition, and how you're going to break that up and change a bit of the monotonous around it. So there's a lot to go into, and it's not necessarily something that you just jump into, because there is, you need to think about what your body needs, but you also need to think about what your body wants in terms of nutrition. So there's a lot going on. Certainly between sort of 3 and 5 in the morning is probably the worst time to be out, because as we were saying last night, whether you're a clubber or an early riser, generally speaking, you're in bed at about before 3 o'clock and you're not up before 5. So it's a tricky concept, but it's certainly an interesting one, and it's something that you can have a lot of fun with.
All right, well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure working with you this weekend.
Look forward to it.
That was James Golding, and the interview really did leave a kind of lasting impact on me. Definitely made me think about what was possible. I've had a small experience of doing endurance events, and I'm anywhere near as talented or good as James, but I have kind of small passion for them, and James is just remarkable what he does. Coming back from his disease to compete at the world level is genuinely remarkable, and I think it shows what is possible out there. Like he says, he spoke about the fact in one of his TED Talks, which I'll leave a link to in the description, that everybody has the same tools. Everybody has arms and legs. Well, the majority of people, sadly some people don't, but everybody has 2 arms and 2 legs, and you can do it. You might not be able to do it that 10% just as well, but you can go pretty close to what everybody else can do. So, you can get 90% of the way there. So why not push yourself? You can do it. And as always, I like to discuss things a bit further, and we're going to start today with talking about the fact that James said that the very interesting and delicate point that cancer was the best thing that ever happened to him. And like he said, that's not something James says lightly, but most people would assume that cancer is the worst thing that could ever happen to somebody, and James is a shining example of how he used the disease to better himself. And I think for a lot of people who know people who have suffered with cancer or other diseases, it shows what's possible. I've seen people who have been hit by medical issues and give up, and James is at the opposite spectrum of that. So it's incredibly, incredibly impressive. And again, like I've said beforehand, he is a huge role model to an awful lot of people. The fact that he talks about kind of the personal possessions and that you forget about it is a very good point, because I think everybody can relate to the fact that they maybe had a personal possession at some point which they thought was the be-all and end-all. But a couple of months down the line, once they got a new iPhone or a different iPad or something like that, they forgot about it. And it's definitely made me think that maybe rather than going for that extra iPhone, which has a slightly different camera and maybe you can do slightly better selfies, or I don't know, something like that, has a fingerprint or Face ID or whatever, maybe you use that money for something like Cancer Research UK or another charity, or even one of the charities that James supports and rides for. Yeah, it's a powerful message which a lot of people hopefully will maybe pick up on. And then finally, I want to talk about the fact how James is never content. He set the world record for the 7-day endurance and the first distance that you can ride in that time. and he wants to go back and do it again. Most people would think that if you set a world record, you'd be happy enough to move on to the next challenge or the next task or something like that. But James thinks he can do even better, and then he wants to do the race across America, and he wants to do even more things after that. He's probably not ready to say publicly yet, and it's so impressive. And I think all of us, having heard from James, or from me from having met James, maybe want to be a bit more like him. I think he has some terrific traits that more people hopefully will gain in the future, and that I think we've seen a huge change in the fitness industry. A lot more people are getting into fitness now and pushing themselves, and I think that's partly due to the internet, and that is something that James is hugely talented at. I think he's got a very big career coming up. He's done one TED Talk already, and I think he's going to do many more in the future. Like I said, I'll link that below if you want to check out more from James. But I said to him at the time, you should do some YouTube stuff, you should do more things like that, because I think it could be really successful. He's got a ton of experience and background and stories, and I think he'd be a brilliant presenter, as I saw from working with him at the Revolve 24 event. He has a lot of skill sets, and he's going to go very far. So make sure you remember the name James Golding. It was such a pleasure to speak to him. So again, thank you for his time. And as always, do check us out on social media at ListenUpCast across all platforms: Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Please do also leave some feedback and leave a review. Let us know what you think about the podcast, because it helps us improve and to keep getting better. And so thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.